what if Iran's entire leadership was wiped out in a single devastating strike? It's a shocking question, right? Well, today we're diving into a scenario based on some recent geopolitical analysis that imagines exactly that. We're going to walk through how an attack like this could unfold, the decades of tension that would lead to it, and of course, the catastrophic global fallout that would almost certainly follow.
So, to really get a handle on the shockwave this would send across the globe, we can't start with the history. No, we have to start right at the moment of impact. Okay, picture this. It's a Saturday morning in Tehran. Inside a heavily fortified government compound, a really high-stakes meeting is going on. We're talking about a huge portion of the country's leadership, all gathered in one room, and they have absolutely no idea what's coming for them. Then, at exactly 9:40 a.m., Israeli missiles slam into the compound. The strike is devastatingly, surgically precise. In an instant, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is dead. But it doesn't stop there. The heads of the armed forces, national defense, the powerful Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the defense minister, they're all eliminated. The very top of Iran's entire power structure is just gone. The sheer scale of this is just staggering. In about 30 seconds, a total of 30 senior Iranian officials were reportedly killed. Now, this wasn't some random attack. This is what military strategists call a decapitation strike. It's a chillingly direct attempt to eliminate the entire command structure in one single blow. You can bet this was the result of a meticulously coordinated operation planned for months. The shock of an attack like this would be immense, but it didn't happen in a vacuum. To understand why something like this could even be on the table, we really need to look back at the decades of hostility that set the stage for this very moment.
You know, the roots of this conflict really stretch all the way back to 1979, when the Iranian Revolution installed a regime that pretty much declared the US and Israel its sworn enemies. For years, it was a kind of Cold War, but everything changed in 2002 with the discovery of Iran's secret nuclear program. That raised the stakes dramatically. We saw a brief period of diplomacy that led to the 2015 nuclear deal, but that hope kind of faded when the US pulled out in 2018. Fast forward to 2025 in our scenario. Iran is rocked by internal protests and a brutal government crackdown, creating a powder keg just waiting to explode.
You see, the whole philosophy behind that 2015 nuclear deal was pretty clear. Use diplomacy and sanctions relief to keep Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. And for a little while, it seemed to be working. It was hailed as this huge victory for international cooperation over conflict.
But then, that diplomatic approach was completely thrown out the window. The Trump administration saw the deal as a total failure that just empowered the Iranian regime. So by pulling the US out, that path of diplomacy was essentially closed off, and the world was put on a much more direct course towards confrontation. So, with its leadership completely wiped out, how would Iran respond? You'd expect anger, right? But this would be something else entirely. Overwhelming force. The regime would launch Operation True Promise 4, a massive counteroffensive that would immediately set the entire region on fire. In the very first wave of retaliation would be aimed directly at Israel. We're talking more than 200 missiles launched, a staggering barrage designed to just overwhelm Israeli air defenses and inflict maximum damage in revenge for the killing of their supreme leader. But the retaliation wouldn't stop with Israel, not by a long shot. Iran would immediately unleash attacks across the entire region, hitting key U.S. allies and assets. Dubai's airport is hit. The U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain is targeted. Ballistic missiles rain down on bases in Qatar and Saudi Arabia. In just a matter of hours, this thing escalates from a single targeted strike into a full-blown regional war. And the consequences of this spiraling conflict would be felt almost instantly, and not just in the Middle East, but all around the globe. This would create both a humanitarian and an economic crisis practically overnight. The initial human toll is just tragic and widespread. Iran would report over 555 of its people killed, with dozens more casualties popping up in Israel, the UAE, and among U.S. forces. And it's really important to remember, these early figures, they don't even begin to distinguish between military and civilian deaths. And this wouldn't just be a military crisis, it would instantly become a global economic one. Oil prices would skyrocket, Iran would threaten to close the Strait of Hormuz, which is a critical artery for the world's energy supply. Meanwhile, its allies would start attacking shipping in the Red Sea. Suddenly, the world's supply chains would just start to seize up. And then, amid all the chaos, a horrific report emerges from Iranian state media. An airstrike on an elementary school, located right next to an Iranian naval base, allegedly killed 175 people.
most of them children. Now, while this hasn't been independently confirmed, U.S. Central Command would announce it's launching an investigation into the strike.
Back in the United States, the operation would ignite a fierce, bitter debate, and it would all center on one critical question. Was this attack on Iran a war of choice or a war of necessity? The answer to that would determine everything about its legality and its justification.
Okay, so this all comes down to a really critical legal distinction. The administration would argue this was a necessary preemptive strike, meaning acting against an enemy that's poised to attack at any moment. But critics would call it a war of choice, or a preventative war, attacking to stop a threat that might materialize down the road but wasn't immediate. That distinction is everything, because preventative wars are generally considered a violation of international law and would require congressional approval.
So the immediate aftermath is a world just teetering on a knife's edge. A dangerous power vacuum has opened up in Iran, probably filled by a new, hardline regime bent on revenge. NATO is on high alert. Intelligence experts are warning that Iran may activate sleeper cells for attacks all across Europe and North America. This conflict would be far, far from over.
And so we're left with that central, unresolved question. Was this a necessary act of self-defense against an imminent threat? Or was it a war of choice that kicked off a global catastrophe? There is no easy answer here, and in a scenario like this, the world would just be beginning to pay the price.